Welcome to the Homeschool Together podcast. Where one working mom and a stay-at-home dad help you navigate the nuts and bolts of the growing and dynamic world of homeschooling.
With a focus on early learners, like me.
All the ins and outs of building and maintaining your homeschool life.
Homeschool.
Find out tips and tricks to make things like this easier.
I'm reading.
And ultimately, enjoy educating your kids. And what's that last thing?
Have fun together. Did I do good, Daddy?
Yeah, you did, sweetie. Good job. Hello and welcome back to Homeschool Together. Thanks so much for joining us. If you have a chance, head down into the show notes and check out the links we have to support our podcast and to leave us a review. We appreciate those people who went out and left reviews. We are up to 62, 63, somewhere in that range?
Yeah, I don't know, but we appreciate those of you.
We appreciate it.
Even if you don't listen on Apple Podcasts, if you can go, you have an Apple device, you can go into Apple Podcasts and leave us a review. We read them all. We really appreciate them. Thank you.
We poured a glass of wine the other night. We read the new ones, and it was very nice. Very, very awesome. In between that and a Brian Langerstorm YouTube video that came out that...
Now you're going to have to put that in the show notes
because
you reference it. That's our favorite YouTube
foodie.
Yeah, recipe guy.
Yeah, we've gone from Babish. What was the other guy we listened to in Brooklyn?
Well, we were watching
the Cozy Kitchen. What was it? The Preppy Kitchen. That's
Preppy
right.
Kitchen,
but now
we
we
started doing weird stuff with the cameras.
He started doing weird. Yeah, we didn't like it. And so anyway, we're now Brian Langerstorm guys.
Yeah. We're probably saying that wrong.
We're definitely saying that wrong.
Anyways, today we have the first of two interviews with Jeanne Faulconer. She is a homeschool mom of grown children that went all the way through to college,
That's right.
So we have a lot to talk with her about.
Yeah.
And she's a homeschool coach and advocate. And so she writes a number of articles for the Homeschool Mom, which is a really terrific resource for any of you that have, just lots of homeschool topics, really great articles that you can read, a huge database resource. Mm-hmm. So we have two interviews with Jeanne, and this interview today is going to be talking to her from more of the homeschool journey perspective about what it was like to raise her kids and go all the way through high school, and what was the college application process like.
That was a really, really fun part.
It was great.
Because I know a lot of us out here are wondering, like, we can
that's the end game, right?
Yeah, we can homeschool the early years fairly well.
Right.
But once you start to get into the, as we kind of said in the interview, when it starts to count.
Right. Yeah.
It starts to matter. And there's a little bit of fear in all of us around that. And, are we up to it?
So.
Are we are we prepared enough? Are we ready to do it? Are we capable enough?
Yeah.
And I think the interview today, I think, can rest a lot of your fears and a lot of the uncertainty that you might have as you begin to move and plod towards that point. I know.
Yeah. I could definitely see that light, at the end of the tunnel, and kind of what the walls look like on that tunnel.
Yeah.
It's one of those things. We know we want our kids to be successful adults and go on to have successful lives and careers and whatever they choose to do. But, I haven't really understood a lot about the specifics. I know it's possible and we're going to do it, but it was great to talk to her about her homeschool journey.
Yep.
And she's just charming and a wonderful source of information. And then next week, we have a really great interview with her from the homeschool coach and advocate perspective, more about trends that are happening in homeschool, things that she's seeing, how homeschooling has changed in the last 20 years.
So, stay tuned to this two-parter.
Both episodes are really great. But for the first one, we just wanted to dive into her family and what brought her to homeschooling and kind of do our homeschool journey, but then talk a little bit more specifically about going through high school and teaching those difficult subjects and things. So if you're wondering about that and you're not sure how you're going to go towards that, that completion of your kid's education, this is a great interview to listen to. So let's take it away with Jeanne Faulconer. Hi, Jeanne. Thanks so much for joining us.
I am so glad to be here with you all today.
Well, we're really excited because we, as homeschooling parents of 3 years, three and a half. Well, let's not go into that.
In spirit, a decade, right? Before we
had homeschooling for a short period of time, and we talk to a lot of homeschool parents that have early learners, but you have a wealth of experience. You homeschooled for over 20 years. And so can you take us back to the beginning? Like, what was your motivation? What got you started homeschooling?
Sure. My oldest kids were in school through second and fourth grades. And so honestly, my first motivation initially was that I wasn't happy with what I saw happening to my young learners. I saw them becoming more reluctant, more hesitant, sort of that spark of interest going away. And it really bothered me. Another part of it that bothered me was the overwhelming amount of behavior modification that was used in schools, all kinds of, you do everything for a reward or to avoid a punishment. And I just did not think this was the way learning should really go. After I took my kids out of school, I kept finding other benefits that kept me homeschooling, things like just more family time together. Suddenly we weren't rushing from right after school to get homework done, to get to soccer practice, to where do we fit in dinner and time with my husband. I mean, the family time and the togetherness just made such a big difference. And then my youngest son, who we kind of had two close together, and then one about, 7, I guess I started homeschooling and had that new baby at kind of the same time. And so he never went to school. So I did eventually end up homeschooling, if you can call it homeschooling, preschool, kindergarten, and all the way through until the kids went to college.
Was homeschooling ever on your radar? You talked about you didn't like what you were seeing, but was it on the radar ahead of time, or was that something you were like kind of forced to pivot into?
Great question. I always knew people who homeschooled and had friends who homeschooled, so it did not seem out of the realm of possibility for me. But I had personally loved school and been a really good fit for school. And the school experience that I had was really positive. I still feel like I am a supporter of good public school, but it was not the same when my kids went to school. And to be fair, they went to what was considered a really good school. The institution itself had changed so much. And even when they had good teachers, the teachers weren't able to really do the things that would meet the needs of many of the kids. But I was familiar with homeschooling.
So you talked a little bit about how you had one child who never saw public school and you had a couple that did. Did you notice a little bit of a different on-ramping, or was there something you had a challenge with the older kids that was different from maybe your younger child?
Sure, for sure. The youngest definitely grew into homeschooling after I already felt in the groove. And my oldest kids had to teach me what was going to work and not going to work for our family. So there was definitely a different experience there. And I think at first, because the older kids had been in school, I was much more in a do homeschooling like school mode. But by the time I had gotten them on up through the years, I really was leaning into homeschooling and did not do things the same way with my youngest. And I actually felt good about both approaches, but I think I enjoyed the latter approach more.
Yeah, I think we've heard that as well. Like from my standpoint, we've homeschooled from the beginning. So they've never, we've done preschools and things of that nature. And we're in a parent partnership that kind of mimics school. It mimics more college than anything. But from that standpoint, like I'm starting to approach things differently with my younger one than I would have with my older one. And that's just because I think I'm becoming more mature. I'm understanding what the kids need. And as an educator, I can definitely see how that could change over time. So when you first started homeschooling, you left school, you said you kind of did school at home. What were your days like when you first started? And then maybe how did they evolve over time as your children got older and older?
At the beginning, I really did use a curriculum. I used the Oak Meadow curriculum, which I still think is a good curriculum. And I tried to have a different curriculum for each of those kids. So the first 2 years, we were trying to do 3rd and 5th grade. And we had a pretty set routine of what we did when we got up in the morning, as far as, reading lessons and doing the projects that went with the lessons, and maybe doing artwork that went with the lessons and so forth. But over time, I found that the kids got so interested in some of the topics that we stayed on them for longer and longer. And it was kind of like, that thing where sometimes you look and your kids are playing together really nicely and you say, oh, I'm not going to mess that up. We're going to
all the time
turn right around, go to the other room.
Yeah. Exactly. We're going to let them play because this doesn't happen that perfectly that often. Yeah. And it's worth it. Right. And so the same thing started happening with academics and their interests. They would get really interested in something. And I would think, why would I leave this topic when they're so into it? So we'd just get another library book or watch another documentary or, look up a project that we could do that was associated with it. And before I knew it, they were also listening to each other's lessons. So I started sort of heading straight down the middle. So maybe we would all do a lesson from the 3rd grade curriculum and then all do a lesson from the 5th grade curriculum and aim down the middle and combine, especially for history and science. But really, even for literature and language arts, it's just that they kind of worked at their own level. Whatever they could do was what they could do. And the longer that went, I'll have to say, really, we became interest-led learners. And then really, we were unschoolers, very academic unschoolers, but we were unschoolers from there. So it really changed over time.
And a lot of times with people, when they first hear unschooling, they think, oh, run free, go do whatever you want. But we've talked to a bunch of unschoolers, and in some respects, some unschoolers can almost be more academic, more rigorous than, than you would do with people would imagine like in a school setting. They do more classes. They take formal classes. They take external classes. They end up becoming very, 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 focused on, right, curriculums and classes, but it's all learner led. And I think that's very funny that you said that you first started with a curriculum and then you kind of just evolved into this learner led system. Could you talk a little bit more about that process? Like, was that difficult for you to kind of let go, or was that something you just naturally went towards following your children and what they were excited about?
I think I really naturally felt comfortable with it. My background had been as a college faculty member, and I was really interested in how learning worked. And I knew how much I had loved learning, and I'd seen my students in my classes. And I very much did trust this process because I saw how valuable it was. Once you see kids saying, can we read another book about mummies, or Stephen Hawking, Mom, who is he? I want to find out more about what he has to say. And that was different from Einstein. You start feeling like this is actually working really well, and that you don't necessarily need a set of curriculum to tell you what to do when. Now, I will say, I continued to be somebody who collected curriculum and used it as a resource. And very often when my kids said, black holes, I could go to my bookshelf and pull off a book about black holes, or a book with a chapter about it. So it's not, as you said, it is definitely not sort of a free-for-all, nothing is happening. In fact, I had a conversation today on Facebook where somebody said, I'm thinking of taking a step back because I need to get a job. So I'm thinking of just unschooling the kids so that I'll have more time for myself. And, it's very hard. This person is very new to homeschooling, and she's thinking it means don't do anything. When I actually found that the unschooling experience was very immersive and required a lot of responsive facilitating in order to work well. So it's not necessarily a step back. And we also were a pretty organized family, as far as, even though, and this wouldn't be true for all unschoolers or all homeschoolers, but we did have a routine. We had regular meals and regular walk times and so we were still pretty routinized. I was listening to one of your all's podcasts where you said your kids thrive on routine. And so even though I wasn't setting a learning structure by a curriculum, we still had a routine, and the kids knew what to expect. And I just facilitated the learning based on what we were all interested in next.
Did you see that your time, obviously when they're younger, you're a little bit more hands-on. Maybe as they get older, they're a little bit more of a facilitator. You're kind of a mentor, helping them into things. How did that change over time? How were you able to adapt to that? A lot of us, especially when they got a lot older, did you need to bring in other people to be specialists with respect to, say, chemistry or physics? Did
Languages.
yeah, were you more of like a CEO manager at that point, as opposed to, a personal manager or coach or life coach type of thing?
Sure, that's a great question. First of all, I'll say you really want that to be true when you have littles, right? You're waiting for somebody to say, okay, when do they do stuff independently? And it's not as soon as you think in a lot of cases, right? My kids at, 10, 11, 12, 13 kind of still needed me to sit down with them, even if it was sort of parallel, like we talk about parallel play with little kids. Maybe I was sitting down working on something I was writing while they were writing so that we could have a conversation back and forth. But beyond that, when they did get into the high school age, absolutely. One of my favorite conference sessions to present is called Homeschooling the Hard Stuff. And we also have at the Homeschool Mom, where I have a lot of my writing, I have some articles there about what to do when you're not the expert and you're teaching. And we definitely outsourced things. We used community college. We used tutors. I sometimes used college students, had a couple different college students. One taught one of my kids German and one taught one of them Spanish. We had, in some cases, depending on where you live, there may be academic co-ops. And I also had the opportunity, we moved a lot. And we homeschooled in 3 different states. And I was fortunate to meet wonderful homeschooling parents everywhere. And so we often traded things where I could work with their kids on writing or public speaking or things like that. And someone else could help my kids in an area that I was not as strong in. So we definitely found ways to make that work. And you don't have to be the direct instructor of chemistry if you don't have any background in chemistry.
Exactly.
So I think it's really interesting. We focus a lot on early learners, and I feel like it's almost easier because, we have a first grader. It's like, I feel like, I'm not going to say it's not for credit yet, but it's kind of like we got a long way to go, right? We have these things we want to get her to by the time she goes off to college, but that's a long runway. But I know a lot of parents are really worried about homeschooling through the middle school years and then homeschooling through high school. And at some point, is it just not going to be feasible anymore? Not just from a, I don't know the material aspect, but all of the other social, emotional stuff. What was your experience like raising middle schoolers and high schoolers in a homeschool environment?
And I'll throw a corollary on that, because the closer you get to college, the more it begins to matter. And I think there's a fear that my inability to be a 7-subject teacher at a 15-year-old, am I pulling my child down? There's that general fear?
Sure. There is a lot of concern about whether we as parents can prepare our kids with all the high school subjects. I think that one thing to keep in mind is that we are more the guidance counselor at that point. And if we don't know, we can ask, we can find out. Again, there's so much research available and so much information available to homeschoolers now. I always tell people, go Google one public school in state, one public school out of state, one private university, and one alternative university, and look at their requirements for admission. And there you go. Well, once everybody does that, then you kind of see what is needed. But the truth is, there is so much flexibility in how to meet those requirements. And I think that is sort of the miracle of homeschooling high school. We often don't realize that kids can learn in different ways other than the school ways. One of my kids learned Spanish when he went to Ecuador as an exchange student. Another one, when I hired the Spanish tutor, I said, take him to the grocery store, play soccer with him, ride the bus with him, and do it all in Spanish. And he didn't really do typical lessons that you might think of as from a textbook, but they were high value experiences that really helped. So I think, leaning into some of the odd possibilities can be really good. One of my kids was really interested in gaming, computer gaming, and I'm a great user, but I don't have any of that experience. And he's a software engineer today, and I am glad to say that he was able to do that despite having a sort of technologically average mom who homeschooled. But we found other people. There was a dad that helped him do a really cool project that he was able to put on his high school transcript. And there are experiences where if you lean into the uniqueness of homeschooling, it doesn't matter that it's different. It is even more, it stands out even more, I guess is the best way to say it. Now, I wanted to say about the social emotional part, because that's another whole question. When kids are in middle school, in that age group, I think there's an interesting thing that can happen in homeschooling there that people don't realize. I always say the best kept secret in homeschooling is the 7th or 8th grade gap year. And sometimes kids at that age kind of have a growing up stage where, they're only interested in snowboarding, or they're only interested in dog training, whatever it is that they're interested in. And the best thing you can do for them is go all in on that instead of fighting them and trying to make them do exact subjects, because these are times where they will find mentors in areas of their interest. They will learn to go deep. They will have sort of Socratic learning opportunities where they're talking with people about this deep interest, where they're learning to do research. And as it turns out, doing school the same way that might be done as a 6th grader, a 7th grader, 8th grader, I mean, I can tell you now that I don't know what my kids did each of those years. I just know we kept learning, and that moving forward and keeping the desire to learn going forward is the most important thing. And that becomes a social emotional thing too, because they gain confidence. They learn how to talk to people. I mean, one of the greatest skills kids can learn at that age is how to email somebody to ask a question. It sounds very simple, but we don't want kids going off to college where they haven't had to ask somebody, how do I do something, or get the information that they need. So,
well, we've said the C word a bunch of times, so let's talk a little bit about college. It sounds like you sent at least one of your children off to college, maybe more. What was that process like? What did the colleges get all confused when you sent your transcripts in? What were some
make your transcripts?
Yeah, how did you do it? Tell us.
College was a really smooth experience for us. One of our kids attended an in-state state university. One attended an out-of-state private university, and our youngest is at an Ivy right now. So they've had all different experiences, and none of them had any issue with their homeschool transcript at all. That said, they all had good college applications and had what I call outside evidence. And we do have an article that I wrote for the Homeschool Mom that explains how to have outside evidence that your kids will do well, even when they're not just doing schoolwork for a parent. And that outside evidence can be things like community college classes or AP classes with an AP test, or work through an online class or a homeschool co-op. And this becomes important because this is where your kids end up getting letters of reference and having some academic credibility. And you might do other things like have them do volunteer service or get awards through Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts, or where they show leadership through sports. So it's not that colleges say, oh, you're homeschooled, of course you can come. They do the same thing with homeschoolers that they do with everybody else, which is they look and they see whether you will be a good candidate to succeed in their school and how they will be able to contribute to the whole campus. So we didn't have a problem. I've worked with hundreds of families as a homeschool evaluator in our state, and students that graduate from homeschooling get into college, and frequently into selective colleges if they want to, and also frequently into multiple colleges. There are one or two, like I had one friend whose son got into 10 different schools, including highly selective colleges. And there was one school that wanted him at the time to take SAT subject area tests, which don't even exist anymore. But out of all of the colleges he applied to, and that one didn't say no, it just said, before we'll admit you, we'd like you to do that. But that's the only person that I've actually heard. I mean, and he was getting into other highly selective schools. He got into his first choice school. So it's really not much of a problem. Here's a weird thing. Trade schools can be pickier than colleges. And so occasionally I do hear of people who have trouble getting into a trade school, especially out of the state where they were homeschooled. And the reason is because trade schools are under a great deal of scrutiny to only provide classes to students who have the ability to benefit from them, or else they're seen as maybe diploma mills or as just, taking your money, like selling a credential, basically. And so trade schools want to go through this operation sometimes where, but where's your exact equivalent diploma to, your state diploma? And like in Virginia, we don't have that. It doesn't exist. But if somebody's trying to go to a trade school, say they want to go to a cosmetology or a barber school or a massage school or, something else, they may struggle because the credential expected in that state doesn't match. We don't have to do that in Virginia. In fact, we can't do that in Virginia. We can't provide anything like that. So it's very odd to me, but true, that sometimes it's vocational or trade schools that are a little bit harder to please. And so I always tell people whose kids are maybe looking that direction, you need to do a little more research to make sure you're not closing any doors there for kids that maybe aren't going to college.
So it's interesting. So is the transcript completely comprised of this outside evidence, or is it also because like in our state, for example, we need 3 years of foreign language for one of our universities, one of our top universities. And so it's like, do you say, oh, well, they completed these out-school classes, or you take an AP test in Spanish? It's like, oh, clearly, they've got it. Like, is the transcript a grouping of classes they took with you or however, and evidence, or is it just all outside evidence?
It's both. So there are two basic ways to set up the academic part, and you can set it up either by year or by subject area. So you can either have 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, 12th grade. And for some students, that's the more advantageous way to do it. Or you could have English, math, science, social studies, electives. And for some students, it's that way. And the reason that might be advantageous is, let's say you have a kid who did all of Algebra 2, but took 1.5 years to do it, but nonetheless did a great job with learning Algebra 2 and knows it all. Mm-hmm. You don't have to specify what year that was done in. On the other hand, you might have a student who was so fast in Algebra 2, finished it in 3 months rather than taking a whole year, and it still shows up and he has time to move on and get another credit. There's different schools of thought about how much detail to give. Some people say, oh, you should have a course description for every class. Some people only provide a course description for their out-school classes or for their private classes that they took at a community center. Other people do it the reverse. They give their descriptions of only the classes that they taught. So there's some variation out there, but there are a lot of good resources on the internet. I know the Homeschool Mom has a transcript template where it will even figure out your GPA if you're one who gives grades, and it will even calculate that for you so that it's ready to roll right out to send out to colleges.
Did your kids have any, we all the homeschoolers know the statistics that we homeschoolers tend to get into college more, they tend to graduate at higher rates, all of those things. Were there any challenges that your children had when they walked into college, going from like kind of a home learning environment, or even taking some classes to being a more formalized, rigid, college experience? What, the testing process, the writing papers, I mean, was that might have been new to them? Were there any challenges there, or, outside of being away from mom and dad and all those things?
Right. Yes and no. I mean, one thing that was different was that my kids did go a little bit older. That would not be everybody's first choice, but my kids did more the take community college classes and work a little bit first. Some kids and some parents are very determined that they want their kid to be admitted to university at 18 and go away and have a very typical 4-year experience. Mine were definitely not just willing, but it just seemed like that's how it worked out. Okay, we'll dual enroll first. We're going to take an English class, and then we're going to take a math class, and then we're going to, mom says we're graduated, so now we're going to enroll full-time into community college or part-time while we work. So in that sense, in some ways, it's not typical for what the same experience that some people want for their kids. For us, we liked the idea that they had a little bit more maturity and experience, and we're a little bit more grown up with an extra year or two, depending on which kid we're talking about. One of my kids actually had a career as a professional musician before he went to college, and he learned a tremendous amount. But it also was the way he got into college. So he's kind of got this thriving musician career, and he starts taking business classes because he's realizing, music is a business, not just an art. Then he starts taking music classes. Then he starts taking classes a la carte at Berklee College of Music. And then he says, I really like this college thing. Then he enrolled full-time in Berklee College of Music, and he started taking non-music, non-business classes. And he's like, I like this whole experience. I want to go to college for something else entirely. And he transferred. So it was more of a gradual thing. So it's a little bit of a different experience. Surprisingly, they did not have trouble. I always think about how odd this is, but my kids did not write a formal paper before they went to community college. This is not a course of action I recommend. It's just what happened. And each of them got A's in their first college writing classes because they did know how to do research. We had talked about plagiarism. We had learned sort of the Socratic method of thinking through things and asking questions and testing ideas. They did understand how to read to get to a main point. So the first paper, did they have to learn how to do it? Yes, but they had all the skills. And guess what? That was what the class was for, was to teach them how to do it. And in many ways, and I had, now let's also be honest, I had been a college English teacher. So this didn't happen in a vacuum. This happened with a mom who knew about stuff. I think I listened to one of your podcasts, Matt, the one about dinosaurs. And I was like, oh yeah, he has a science background. So, this you're filling in a lot of blanks there subconsciously. So I don't want to say people don't need to show their kids how to write. Obviously that's not true, but knowing how to think and knowing how to meet deadlines and knowing how to do research and knowing how to not steal other people's ideas turned out to be a great recipe for doing well in college English classes.
Absolutely. So we'll step back into your homeschool. So we were in college. We'll come back into regular homeschooling. We always like to ask people, tips and tricks and cool things, wins that people can take away. What was something that was in your homeschool? You said you moved a bunch of times. Was there something that you couldn't live without? For me, it's crates. Everything's in crates. Some people love certain types of pens. What's your pen again? The G2,
it's Pilot G2,
Pilot G2s, and mine is composition notebooks. I love them. Just the scratching. What was the thing for you guys that you realized that you couldn't live without?
Well, library card, bookshelves, and the internet. All the outdoor sports and backyard stuff. My kids were very, very active. I will say when I first started homeschooling, as my baby got to be toddler size, we did a lot of our homeschooling at the sandbox so that the little guy could be playing in the sand and I'm reading aloud. And maybe the older kids are even sort of sculpting in the sand, whatever I'm reading about, but all the outside things I would say would be something. My husband made me my favorite ever piece of furniture, which is he made a bookshelf changing table. So the top was a changing table and it had one shelf right below that with the diapers and wipes and washcloths and all that. And then the next two shelves were for all the oversized books, like the big DK books and the big picture books and all that kind of thing. So that in that spot, basically, I had everything I needed to get through. So that's sort of my magic piece of furniture that we had.
Cool.
I love it. Just something that's, unique and perfect for you. So
wonky homemade bookcase is perfect.
I love it. Yeah. We like a good bookcase in our house.
Right there.
Lots of bookcases. This is the smallest one in the background here. We
That's
have
for all our curriculum.
House of bookcases.
So people can't see it because they're listening, but behind me is all of our curriculum hoarding.
Oh no, this is only a portion.
It's only a portion of it.
It's funny when we said we have to go get a new bookcase from IKEA. My mother-in-law's like, another one? Because our house is filled. Every single room in our house has a bookcase.
Yes,
even our 3-year-old's room has a bookcase.
Yes.
So I hear you on the bookcase. So with this long, this long experience of homeschooling your kids from the beginning for your youngest all the way up, like, what's the thing you wish you would have done differently, or that you would want to tell people, like, hey, this is what I would take away from it. We learn so much from an experience, and it's hard with us, being newer homeschoolers. We don't have the experience yet to know. We don't know what we don't know.
We haven't failed enough.
Right. I would say newer homeschoolers have the tendency to do too much, too fast, too soon. And right out of the gate, you're excited. I was excited. I was happy about the change. It was a positive change for our family. And I wanted to do all the things, and I wanted to prove that we could do it right now. And I wanted to be organized enough so that we never dropped any balls. And so I think learning how to ratchet down that intensity level and enjoy the kids, and then let them enjoy their lives together and their life with you and their life of learning is something that you just can't ever trade for anything better than that. That is really where you want to go. So I think I've learned a lot about where kids are emotionally affects their ability to learn. So no matter how much you might be frustrated because they can't memorize their times tables, or because they won't conjugate the verbs correctly, the fact that you are more upset about that and they're not meeting the goals and that this is becoming a big deal to you isn't going to help nearly as much as if you take a step back and meet them where they actually are instead of where you want them to be. So I'm glad I had my kids to help me learn that.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice.
That's great.
One last thing I'd like to ask, speaking of your kids, I'm always thinking about what things I do with my daughter now that she's going to talk about in therapy someday. So,
Hopefully
because
not.
I did, right? You know, the things I did with my mom, I talked about in therapy. So how do your kids feel about being adults who were homeschooled? If friends came and asked them, oh, what, you were homeschooled? What was that like? What do you think your kids would say? Do you think overall it was positive? Would they have had some reservations, or, you know, what's their perspective?
They have told me that it was positive. Overall, they definitely think it was positive. One of my sons told me that when he got to college, he realized that his peers were very burned out, and they had been told what to do for years and years and years, and that he was fresh to all of this idea of meeting requirements that somebody else set for him, and he felt like it was a great advantage. One of my other sons told me that he felt like it was a big advantage in terms of freedom of thought. Our family is definitely one that is going to test out all the viewpoints and read about all the possible worldviews. And he actually felt like that was broader than what he encountered in some of his college classes. We used to joke and say that our homeschooling was more like grad school, because we would kind of lie around and talk about good books and then go out to the coffee shop and talk about them some more.
Yeah.
I think that they feel like they had a good experience. Honestly, I think they would say that moving frequently had a bigger impact on their lives than homeschooling did, and that homeschooling was probably a mitigating factor as far as making the moving at least a little bit better, because at least the school part didn't change, and they did get some confidence. Okay, mom's going to get us plugged in. We're going to find our people again. But moving was challenging. And so I think they would probably say that was harder.
It's very interesting.
That's great. Yeah. I'm always wondering what our girls will say when they're adults. And I'm hoping that they'll say
great dad jokes.
Yeah. Well, I'm hoping that they'll say, wow, we had so many experiences we couldn't have had if we had been in school all day. Yeah. That's what we're going for. We're going for the experience.
Well, we're trying to fill in everything, because we do a co-op, a parent partnership as well. I think they're going to have that kind of, we're piecing together all the experiences with, extracurriculars, sports, our parent partnership, things of that nature, is giving them a lot of those feels that feel like regular school, but still we do the homeschooling. So I think they're not going to know the difference. I think they wouldn't.
I think it's a good mix, but I think it's a very interesting, it's interesting to question it from their point of view. Like, what are they going to see? So I love hearing that your kids really felt like it was a valuable and positive experience.
Yeah.
I have a couple funny stories. One is one of my sons went to a study group in community college for one of his classes, and he came home and he said, Mom, it was just great. Nobody knew that I was a homeschooler at all. It really doesn't matter. I get it. We just all want to learn the material and do well in the class. A couple weeks later, he came home and he said, Mom, everybody in the study group was homeschooled except for one. So it turned out the homeschoolers had kind of found each other, were interested in the study group, had set up their own way to learn together, and had, somehow, magically found each other, even though that wasn't the intent. And nobody spoke up, for a couple weeks for them to identify that. So that was a pretty funny one. I'm trying to think about there was another one sort of like that. When the kids got older and they were working and they were going to college, they said, nobody ever asked about homeschooling because they don't assume that you were homeschooled. I mean, it doesn't come up. You're just a person like everybody else. And so it's not like you have, a scarlet H stamped onto your forehead that stays with you forever. I like to think that they got to take the good experiences and the good relationships that we had, and that gave them some advantages along with the academics, as they went out into the world, but they really don't look and seem different from other people.
And people always say, oh, those homeschoolers are weird. It's like, do you know the last time you interacted with a homeschooler? Because you probably did. Yeah. You just didn't know. Yeah. Right?
Exactly.
We're all over the place.
Yeah.
Yes, very much so.
Well, we appreciate you spending the time talking about your homeschool experience. I think we're going to bring her back.
Yeah.
To talk about more about the homeschooling, above us, what homeschooling challenges and things that are going on in the homeschooling world and stuff. And we'll bring it back to talk about that. But thank you so much for being on the show. It was really insightful on hearing about your process, because you're here and then we're down here. And
so you can't see Matt is gesturing with a slope here.
My Italian hands with a little bit of math sloping here. Yeah, no, it's really nice to see the progression and knowing where you could be going and helping other people make decisions. Is hearing people who have gone through it, telling them that it's not that bad. You'll make it, I think, is a comforting thing.
And that's maybe the other thing that I'm glad that I always had during homeschooling, was people who had gone before and kind of paved that road and had that experience. So I'm happy to have the chance to continue to do that and kind of pay it forward or pay it back, because that's having somebody else's experience to learn from is the best.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us today and making us a part of your homeschool journey. Please engage with us on social media. Join our Homeschool Together podcast group on Facebook and find us at Homeschool Together Podcast on Instagram. We'd love to hear your feedback, questions, and recommendations. Until next time.
Happy homeschooling!